Well, so great to see so many people here. So before we start, I just wanted everyone to know that we will be recording this, and so I'm kind of going to try to stay right here. Or I don't really have to be on camera, but so that for people who aren't able to come today, we'll have this recording available. We'll probably send it out along with the slides. Just really want to welcome you all here to talk about this very important topic. I'm Roberta Zare, Superintendent of Portola Valley School District. Here today we have Lynette Hoagland, Principal of Ormondale School. We have Trustee Gary Hanning. Thank you for joining us. Gary's also on our Emergency Preparedness Committee in the district and the Superintendent's Construction Progress Committee, of which we are starting to not have anymore because now we have these beautiful buildings. And I'm very excited about that. And while I'm thinking about it, I wanted to invite everyone in the community to our ribbon cutting event on October 20th at 4 o'clock starting here in Ormondale, and then moving on to Corte Madera for some more festivities so we can celebrate our beautiful new campuses and thank our community members for their patience in these last several years. And then we also have two other trustees that have come in. Amy Armsby, thank you so much for being here, and Kimberly Morris-Rosen, she's our board president. So very happy to see everyone. And please raise your hand if you're a parent in the district. Great to see you all. And then we also have Ashmir. She's our New Horizons director over here on the Ormondale campus, and really glad you're here so we can ensure that our kids are safe all the time. Connie No is our chief business official. So thanks for being here as well. We have Travis DeFreitas. He's our facilities manager, new to the district, and an important part of this whole process as well. Kim, sorry, 1 second. Giuliacci, I'm sorry. Kim Giuliacci is here with us today from Wildfire Protection District. Good morning. And she and I will be co-presenting today and have a lot of great information to share. This is informal, so we won't read the slides. If you have any questions or comments along the way, please jump right in. With that, I think we'll just get started. And Connie's going to be doing the, when I do this, you can advance the slides. So here's what we'll be talking about today, and then we'll just get right into it. So the next slide has our Big 5 emergency response protocols. So every school district in San Mateo County and other municipalities in the county adhere to these safety protocols. And today we'll be talking mainly about secure campus and evacuation as they pertain to wildfire safety and even smoke. Today we have a poor air quality day, so we'll be having our secure campus to ensure that our students are safe and our staff are safe due to the poor air quality. This presentation, when you get it, has a live link to the Big 5 community packet. I really recommend that you click on that and take a look. Keep it close by because it has some great protocols for families and community members pertaining to any number of emergencies. Come on in, have a seat. That might happen. So I really wanted to start with this slide and this idea of that we have a unified response in our county, which I really appreciate as a superintendent, and we train all of our students and staff on these protocols. So when law enforcement or the fire protection district or any emergency responders show up, we have the same vocabulary, and we have the ICS, the incident command system set up, and so it's really a streamlined and operational approach to dealing with any emergencies that may happen. So we train all of our staff and students with all of these protocols. Next slide. Our district also has, this is my 5th year in the district, and the first year that I started in 2019, the fall of 2019, we had some wildfires locally. So we developed this wildfire response plan that has evolved, and we are learning along with our emergency partners, Woodside Fire Protection District and the town of Portola Valley. So we continue to update this plan. But the purpose of this plan, and it is an internal document, it has compromising information that if the public were to know, like for example, our phone numbers and things like that. So we don't publish this for the community, but there are aspects of it that are integrated into the information that we share with our parents and the community. But I point this out because it has everything that we need to know as a district internally to respond to and even proactively prepare for if there is a wildfire in the district. So it's important that you know that we have this, and our administrative team uses this information. Next slide. So I will actually ask him to jump in because this is your forte, thinking about evacuation terminology and shelter in place. So if you can go back to the previous slide, Connie. Evacuation terminology, there are evacuation warnings and orders. So if you go to the previous slide, please. So can we talk about that?
Okay, so it's defined here, but basically the two differences is when it doesn't even have to be a wildfire, it could be a horrible storm, it could be any kind of emergency where we need to evacuate the area. The district will issue an evacuation warning, just letting you know that this is what's going on in the area, there are potential hazards, there are potential dangers, and we're informing everyone that it would be a good idea to start preparing to evacuate. It's always recommended to evacuate early from anything. It's better than waiting, especially in this community, because of the one-way streets, because of the narrow streets, because of there's a lot of junction points of getting in and out of this community, that it's good to start just leaving because you're looking at traffic jams. There could be a lot of traffic issues from getting out. But that's the evacuation warning time. Then as things progress and they get worse, then you'll get the evacuation order saying you need to evacuate right now. And it's very hard it's a really great area to be able to say how much time anything can be, because things can change so drastically. We've seen such high winds, we've seen changes in the weather depending on humidity levels, it depends on the time of the year. There's so many different things that can change how quickly weather can take its turn. So when evacuation order is finally given, that's why you have the warning to start preparing, and if not already leaving, and if you haven't done so, is leave now. So you've already had that warning to prepare, and now's the time to actually leave. Now when it comes to the schools, because that's the main thing that you would all be concerned about, the fire department is in communication with the schools, letting them know constantly updates on what's happening. So when the schools start to evacuate, they have their own orders and they have their protocols, which is why it's important for all of you to know what that means and how they'll communicate to you as parents and the time of when it's time to come and get your kids. So however that, depending on what the situation is, the school will communicate through you via, Parent Square, and let you know, hey, start coming to pick up your kids, because some people are coming from distances, wherever you work, wherever you live, to give you enough time to pick up your kids before we get to a situation where now they're not going to let any more parents come into the district or to the area to pick up your kids, and which leads to the next, unless you have something more to say on this.
I don't, thank you.
Moving on to which then leads to the shelter in place. So when it gets to the point where now we still have students behind, there are still students here because parents haven't been able to get there, or maybe didn't get the information soon enough, or they're traveling from far away and they're trying to make arrangements how to get the kids, there is this shelter in place. And this is where the students stay behind. Should this be something that happens, the fire department, they will know when students are left in a building, and in the case of, let's say, wildfire, I'll go with wildfire first, they will call for additional resources to come and protect the structure. So they'll offer structure protection to protect the structure because they know that there are still students and staff in these buildings, in their evacuation area that they'll be sheltering in place at. So that they'll be protected until there's a time that they can actually evacuate the area, if it gets to that point. But shelter in place, It's not a bad thing. The kids are well protected, the staff are well protected, as with the new construction that Roberta was talking about. These buildings have been built specific to there's a chapter in the building code that is for construction for being in these type of communities, which your buildings are made, the exteriors are non-combustible, you have tempered glass, there's vents, there's a lot of different protection measures to protect the buildings from wildfire. So know that your students will be protected in the building. In some cases, they're a lot safer being inside these buildings than being out in a car at the last minute trying to get out. So a lot of times it's a safer environment to be. The school works very actively with keeping defensible space and keeping the area clear of vegetation, which is like 100 feet of defensible space around the structure, which makes it great for it being a shelter-in-place spot, but as well as for firefighters to be here to be able to protect the structure. So if you have further questions on that, please feel free to ask, but that's the basics on that.
So I would also add that our designated locations for shelter in place at each school are multi-use rooms or the gyms. And that is a recommendation and guidance from the Woodside Fire Protection District. So if we were to have to shelter in place, those would be the 2 rooms or locations where we would do that.
Aren't those older buildings? Are they still to the same standard?
They are, yeah, they still have the same rating. We have a slide on that with information specifics on the type of materials that are used.
Is there a designated number of staff to children,
So that's a great question. All of our staff are considered disaster service workers, and that's part of being a public employee, is that they sign up to be a disaster service worker as well. So we don't release staff if we don't have the right ratio. And so staff are required to stay on campus until and unless an administrator releases them, and the safety of our students is our primary concern. So they all know that. We remind them of that every year, and that's something that they are aware of, and it's part of their job. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. So there will be, in the event of an emergency, the possibility of evacuating or an unplanned dismissal if we get word from the Woodside Fire Protection District. So when we do decide to evacuate, we'll talk a little bit about what student release looks like and the transportation to an off-site location. But we also might decide to close schools, which is a really heavy decision that we don't take lightly. We actually have a decision tree and criteria that we use. I have this in the presentation as well. We'll show you the factors that we look at. We consult with the experts, with Woodside Fire Protection District, as well as the county superintendent. There's a lot of late night calls and emails going back and forth. And then I consult with our board as well. But the safety of our students and staff are our primary concern. So we have levels that we've established to determine if we're in a certain level based on various factors, what the district's response would be. So I'll show you that in a little bit as well. Is there anything you wanted to add? That's good. Okay. So we are working with different agencies to establish off-site assembly locations. It might be something as close as Woodside Priory or Woodside High School, even Kenyatta College, or Stanford. So we're looking at different locations depending on the circumstances and where the fire is coming from. And then the question is, how do we get our students there? So what Kim was saying earlier, if there was a situation where we had started school and we're in session and we know that we're going to need to close, we would likely, and everything again is dependent on circumstances. So one scenario is that we would send word to families, if you're in the area, come and get your child. Again, this is the recommendation and guidance of the Woodside Fire Protection District and law enforcement, because the sheriffs also have a say in like the road management and traffic safety and all of that. But it could happen where we say, come and get your child, and we'll have procedures for doing so. But by a certain time, let's say by 11 o'clock, we're going to transport off site. And that might look like buses coming in with an agency that might be Sequoia Union High School District, where we work with them to transport some of our students for field trips and whatnot. And it would depend on availability of buses. So there's a lot of backup plans and communications that happen behind the scenes. And we have memos of understanding with different agencies, or are in development with those agencies to get the plans operational in the event that that is what's needed. It's not ideal, and this is really tricky, and this is what keeps me up at night. So we don't have all the answers worked out, but we are definitely partnering with the agencies, the Department of Emergency Management, as well as the town of Portola Valley, to ensure that we have the direct lines of communication set up, and these types of instances where, if this was necessary, we could move forward in these directions, but it depends on the circumstances. I know that's very nebulous, but any questions about that? Next slide. So when and if we do have a student release and reunification with parents, we will, first of all, let me back up. We had a drill or simulation a couple years ago, I think it was May of 2022, at Fort Madera, where Kristen, the principal, practiced the student release with families at the end of a day. And so we learned a lot from that drill, and we'll be doing both of those. Both of our schools will have that drill again this year, so that we can plan for and have the students and the staff learn. Good morning, good to see you again. We just saw each other yesterday at the all-day Big 5 training, so
Yes.
good to see you. So we'll be practicing the drill, so you'll be hearing more about that from your principal this year. But the location will more than likely not be the school where we'll have the reunification and student release. So wherever that will be, for example, one of those offsite locations that I mentioned, we'll deploy all of the logistics around how to release students at that offsite location, but we'll practice it as a drill here at the school just because that's what's practical. Does that make sense? Okay, next slide, please. So you'll be learning a lot more about this year as parents, our reunification process. There's, again, what we learned about at the Big 5 training from, I don't know the actual name of the organization. I think it's called iloveyou.org.
I love you guys.
iloveyouguys.org. And it is a really defensible, comprehensive process for reunification. For our, it actually has everything you need in terms of the forms and the signs and the processes for reunifying, and a method and process for parents to get their kids after an emergency in a way that's safe, and we ensure that the right kid is going with the right adult. So what it would look like, first of all, is that parents will receive a notification, either a text message and or voicemail and or an urgent alert on their phone through Parent Square. And the expectations are that wherever the site is, the location, that parents bring identification and bring their patients. And then next slide. So, and again, we're still working through all the details, and we're going to plan for this as if it may happen, but hopefully it won't. And we'll communicate and over-communicate this with families. But the process is that students will only be released to individuals who are identified on a student's emergency contact, and that's done through Power School, and that's why it's critically important that parents keep the Power School information up to date. So like Aunt Betty out in Idaho isn't a good person to be on the emergency release form. It has to be people who are local, so you might think about someone who lives nearby, or your child's best friend's parent who's down the street, to be on the emergency contact. I would rather not release a student to someone who's not on the card, then take the chance that it's someone who the parent doesn't want the kid to go with. So we'll keep students who are not picked up. In other words, we'll stay with them until the parent or someone on the emergency card is present to release the child. And we will stand firm on that. So we'll be looking at picture IDs and matching it to the information that we have in our system.
Is this process, if you closed school because, so this is not reunification, but you're being, proactive in closing it because there's a wildfire nearby, is the same thing apply, or is that just like a regular school pickup?
I don't know about that. That's a great question.
Because I'm thinking that there are only certain people that are right now have on my students' emergency contact.
Yeah.
But if I were not in town and you guys were getting everybody out,
Yeah.
I'd be like, please take my child out, right?
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want to put 20 people on my emergency contact because I don't want you contacting them, if my child is sick or something, right?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it definitely does. That's a great question. It seems to me, just thinking right on my feet right now, that we would release students like we would at the end of the day pickup if it's here on campus. And this situation would apply if we're off campus and, it's an extreme emergency type of thing.
Okay. One other thing to think about with that, if there's a wildfire nearby, we're not evacuating the town yet, but everybody's going home, is maybe to have a plan. My kid walks to Triangle Park every day, but maybe I don't want him walking to Triangle Park if that's the evacuation. I want to pick him up at school.
Yeah.
So that's something
How
for the
to
school
get
and
that
parents to think about,
communication.
what's the message?
Yeah, to not release students to be able to walk or to go.
If they even walk, I don't know. If they normally walk home and the parent's not home.
Another
or the
great
parent is
question.
home, or,
Yeah.
Just thinking quick, that would be the instance where the school staff would make an announcement to students, we're gonna be, evacuating the school, or we're doing early dismissal due to whatever. For those of you who walk home, do not leave this campus, or maybe have them report somewhere. I mean, I'm sure the staff will start thinking about what to do with those students that are gonna be walking home, is to announce to them. And just to let the parents know, we're not gonna be releasing your kids if they walk home. They're gonna be checking in at the school office or checking in somewhere with specific staff, so that they'll be corralling those students and then figure out what they're gonna do with them, whether, depending on the situation, they're gonna shelter in place or evacuate them somewhere else or whatever have you. So I'm sure that'll be something, that you guys will have in. And then also with the reunification, that's just a reminder of that process is really in place for an evacuation where students are taken, like as Roberta, off-site, nothing to do with if it's an early dismissal or an early pickup.
Yeah.
Due to specific circumstances, it's literally evacuation order, these kids are still left behind, we're evacuating them here. The event has passed, or the event is now safe to where parents can now come pick up their children, and this would be the process to release your students or your kids back to the parents.
Thank you, that was really helpful. Thank you. Next slide, please. So the process off-site may look like this, that the parent will go to the reunification check-in and we'll have signage to show where the parents would go, organized by last name, and then we'll have a reunification card, which parents will get at the pickup place. So that the card is double-sided, so parents will fill out information on both sides. We'll detach the information and give the parents, keep one half of it, give the parents the other half to go to the next line, which is the reunification area. And that's where the parent would show the picture ID, and we would match that with our records and the card. And then release the student from the student assembly area. So that's something, again, that we'll have to practice with staff, and we'll practice that at school because that's what's practical. But that is essentially the system that we'll put into play. Yeah.
How did you coordinate like siblings? Port Madera when you guys did this?
So there would be, so just practically speaking, the siblings would all be in that one area in the, by last name. And then you would fill out 2 cards and you'd get 2 kids. But
When you've got a kid at each school, I think, is the question.
Yeah.
When you've got a kid at each school.
So the idea is, and again, depending on the circumstances, I would imagine that if there's such an event, that we would evacuate both schools. It wouldn't just be one school or the other. So both schools would be evacuated to that same reunification place. But again, all of that is dependent on the circumstances.
And it does, but I would also add that if it was just one particular school, your siblings are not gonna be reunited at that point. You would still need to go to the other school as you would normally if that school is not in any danger. So it's, the goal is, because then you're shuffling too many students, because people can have multiple kids, and the school is not gonna, unless, like Roberta was saying, unless it's an evacuation, both schools are going to one location. And you're still doing you're still doing your 2 reunification cards to pick up each student. They're still gonna be grouped by their last name in a location. So, I mean, again, these are things that are good questions at the school when they practice this process, that siblings would be something that they're gonna have, that they will say, okay, this didn't work during our practice run, so maybe this process. But that one, it's a good question to bring up when it comes to both of them evacuating the school. But when one school is only being evacuated, then the others, the same protocols would apply to each of the individual schools.
So I'm just wondering about access to buses in a situation like this, because we don't have our own buses.
Right.
So has there been a discussion with, say, Sequoia Union District about what their protocol would be for sort of
Yes.
lending out buses?
Yeah, so we're working out an MOU with them, and then also in discussions with Samtrans. And this is, again, really tricky because they need their buses too.
Right.
And so everything is dependent on, where the danger is and where the wildfire is coming from. And so what law enforcement has told us is that they will also work to deploy transportation. But we want to have
a guarantee.
a guarantee and,
Sort of.
numbers in our cell phone that we can dial and not wait for, someone else to do that for us. So we have to follow multiple paths and planning for various situations.
Great.
It won't depend just on one area, so
Great.
it's tricky. I mean, we even thought, okay, how do we do it where little kids in cars if needed? So, I mean, nothing is off the table yet, but really looking at buses, if we can evacuate early enough to get the buses in and then out. Yeah.
Randy True here. I'm on the Emergency Preparedness Evacuation Subcommittee and helped work on the new the draft evacuation plan that's been published for the town.
I know you looked familiar because
Yeah.
I attend virtually, and I said,
Yeah.
no, I saw you. So thanks for your work on that.
I mean, I joined the effort on that in April, and with the other subcommittee members, Rob Young and Dale Fowd. Rob Young has been spearheading it for the last year and a half, and it's put a great deal of work into it, so I really recommend everybody take a look at it.
Yeah.
So I have a whole number of questions, but related to this one, it sounds like the primary plan is to bus students off-site after the hazard has passed, after the emergency, after the imminent danger has passed?
Not necessarily.
No, okay, that's not the primary.
It's when they finally get the evacuation order to evacuate in and out, they have to go. So you have the warning time, and that's the time when, hey, we've decided, and you'll see the decision tree, we decided the school's gonna close, they start to look, parents come pick up your kids, that gets done. But sometimes there's maybe kids still left behind because parents can't make it quick enough. So this is the backup plan, what to do with these left kids, even though they could technically shelter in place, but the shelter in place sometimes can be a last decision. It just, so many different circumstances, you have to make your decisions depending on what's happening.
Yeah.
So it could be that the plan of getting more kids out at once would be the buses. So not necessarily will happen after. The reunification would happen after the event or the hazard has passed, and it's safer now for parents to come pick up their kids. But as far as the buses, and that's why it's a tricky coordination, because there's a window, trying to get them in, the buses in, and then getting the kids out. So that's a really tricky coordinated effort. But the goal would be to get the buses in prior, maybe around that morning time, and seeing how many students are left, and then getting those buses to get those students to the evacuation site, and now they're already out of the school.
Okay.
So it depends.
I noticed it's, and I think there might be some confusion, among us, and when, as this discussion has happened between the reunification and then a controlled evacuation during an emergency. And so I think getting clarity on that could be super helpful. And what I've heard was a couple of years ago, the county, the DEM, looked at getting buses in during an evacuation, during an active evacuation, and that was deemed too risky and too time intensive, especially given our limited evacuation routes, and that alternative was being, if not abandoned, completely deprioritized in favor of shelter in place.
Yeah.
And so I think understanding that's really important for us.
That's the message that I hear as well when we talk with Department of Emergency Management, and it makes logical sense to me. It's not, getting buses here isn't practical in most of the scenarios because of the conditions of where we live and where we work. So that idea and the plan isn't getting a lot of traction, but it's something that we're still pursuing. But we also have shelter in place and early release, and what we've heard is if it's a red flag day, then close school. Like, that's pretty much err on the side of closing school if there's going to be a red flag day. We take our guidance from Woodside Fire Protection District and don't make these decisions in isolation, for sure.
And I think the busing thing, that was the discussion of the backup to the backup. Like, it's to have in place in case. It's not their first line of defense. It's not gonna be the first thing they go to decide to do. It's just that they have been, the schools, it's just something else to have as another tool in their toolbox in case, to have in place. So that's the discussion still that, as Roberta was saying before, they're looking at it, but it's not certainly part of their decision making.
Yeah.
And I mean, the buses would be for all scenarios, not necessarily fire, right? So let's say we have an earthquake and maybe the campuses aren't safe, but the roads are inaccessible. In theory, this would be an application that you can use the bus,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, or active shooter. Any other questions about that? Okay. Next one. And the next one. Okay, so in Portola Valley School District, we have, there's a lot of text there, but I just want to point out a few things. Our buildings, as Kim said earlier, are made with materials that are non-combustible and compliant with the laws regarding school construction. And our ventilation systems are built so that we can, on days like today or during a wildfire emergency, close off the vents, and they're tied into our fire alarm and notification systems. And our roofing is also, like the building materials, compliant with all of these different roofing systems. And then our new buildings are fully compliant as well. And having said that, our new buildings were not built with the idea that these would be our shelters in place, but nevertheless, the materials that have been used are compliant and designed to resist ignition as the code requires.
What would, are there aspects of the new buildings that would sort of take them out of consideration for shelter in place, or are you just saying they weren't specifically designed for that function?
So both.
Okay.
So think about the windows.
Yeah.
That is, a concern. That they are, like I said, all the materials are compliant, but they weren't designed with shelter in place in mind. I can get more information about that. This information actually is hot off the press from our architect and construction team. Just yesterday, they filled me in on some more of the details of it, but that's about as much as I know about it.
Yeah. I'm just curious because I'm wondering if there might be a scenario where the schools become a shelter in place for more than just the students. And that wouldn't be a consideration for the school district so much as maybe the
I can-
folks who are looking at emergency.
It's a good question and something that, that people would consider, but I'll tell you that there are requirements within a school because of the mixing of children with adults.
Right.
It can be more hazardous in controlling the environments because of the requirements that students have to be separated because of age, appropriate. And when you have adults, that can lead to more issues with, you have big adults creating more chaos sometimes, or panic, or what have you.
Sure,
And
yeah.
they're gonna trample these little kids.
Well, not
So-
saying it's ideal, but if it's
No.
the question of dying or being
Well,
protected.
but it would never be directed as this is gonna be a shelter-in-place spot for everyone.
Got it.
That for adults, and that would be something that is worked on evacuation plans for the town itself.
Yes, that's why I'm
Yeah.
asking. I know it's not a
Yeah,
school district
but that would be
question.
looked at a different location
Yeah.
for the town itself. Most likely, you won't see a commingle between school. Hey, if adults make their way here because they do, okay, but it's not something that they would say, oh,
Right.
this school is gonna be designated because of the commingling of children and adults. It would be very difficult to manage and oversee
Right.
the safety of both.
I guess it's probably possible though if the disaster happened on a weekend and students weren't even here, the building
Would be-
could be
right.
used
Right.
if
Yeah.
you all
And
decided
again,
that that was the
you know,
right thing
and
to
that's a
do.
big discussion and, you know, that would have between school districts and
And the
towns
town,
and
yeah.
everything.
Right, right. Yeah, I know it's typically high schools that end up being.
High schools, colleges,
Yeah.
churches.
Yeah. Great, thank you.
Great
Sorry.
question, thank you, yeah. Anything else? Next slide. So as Kim pointed out earlier, we work really hard to maintain defensible space around all of our campuses and make repairs as needed so that that doesn't cause further damage and that we keep vegetation and brush to a minimum. And then also just, it's relatively germane to the topic, but we are hiring an arborist to do a risk assessment of all of our trees at Corte Madera specifically, especially I call them heritage trees, I think they're called significant trees here. The trees, the older trees that may have we have some safety concerns around and just are wondering about their health. So we'll be taking a look at that at Corte Madera specifically, and then possibly here at Ormondale, once we get that work going at Corte Madera. Any questions? Okay, so now, this is like the heart of the presentation here, the information. Again, a lot of text. This is available on our website, and at the end, you can take a picture of a QR code. And actually, I sent this information out already once this year, and we'll send it out again. But there are different levels of activity, and so each level has what our district will do, what our action is in response to the level of the wildfire activity in the area and the communication that we'll have. It's important to note that level 3 is when there's an evacuation warning that, and again, if there's students on campus or no students on campus, but if there are students on campus, we will, as we've discussed, follow controlled dismissal procedures and then evacuate and follow the directions of the law enforcement and Woodside Fire Protection District. And if there's an evacuation order, if it's level 4, a red flag day, red flag warning, then we will definitely follow shelter-in-place protocol and be in communication with the Woodside Fire Protection District. So the scenarios are just endless in terms of like the time of day, and if there's after-school programming, extracurricular activities, we're in communication with our after-school programs and the sports programs to ensure that they're safe as well. So there's a lot of nuances here. This is just very high level.
Do you guys have radios to communicate with the appropriate authorities if 911 is jammed or phones are down?
So we have a very sophisticated radio system. we don't have one here, but, and we've trained all of our staff, every staff member has one, and the channels connect with both schools and with the town, and so we need to make that connection more, we have to strengthen that connection with the town on their radio system, but we do have the capability. We also, there's a communication slide, I'll talk a little bit more about that.
Sorry, so it does or it doesn't go to the fire and
Let me check
protection
on that,
agencies?
so Tony
Because if
is,
phones are down, there's no other way to
Yeah.
get
There's
any
no way for
information
them
out.
to interact with emergency services.
Okay,
Or is
Unless
it-
we have a radio of theirs that we can interact, which our CERT program does have.
okay, so getting a CB radio on campus would be a way to,
Not necessarily, we
No.
would have to look for a different type of, like, if the radio system that they're saying they have in place, that they can communicate with both schools. And that would be, it's a good question, because it'll be good coordination that we'll have to have with the school district, is to also, test out and get that radio for a backup as a means of communication if it works to the district. But for now, it is phones, so that is something that is, having to be looked at, is what's the backup form of communication when the phone lines go down.
and I'm confident that our system has capability, it's really sophisticated and top of the line. And so, I'm pointing over there to Tony, he's our, tech coordinator in the district. So Tony and Kim and I will take that offline and prioritize that discussion, because that's something that needs to happen.
And I know that, through CERT and stuff, there's a robust, my understanding is there's a robust radio set up in town,
Yeah,
so that might be
we
something.
need to sink in with that as
So
well.
our radios will work with that, yeah.
They would,
Yes,
okay.
absolutely, they're VHF radios. My guess is that you could probably listen in on our channels, but we can't listen in on your channels. So there might be some way to create a communications link there, but it's not gonna be, we don't have the same capabilities. We can't talk straight
Right.
to you guys,
Right.
unless you turn to one of our channels.
So it is something, that we do need to look at for communication for backup.
But we've been in communication with Ray Rothrock, who handles the town's CERT radio system, and so he knows what radios we have, and he's actively working with us to make sure that they easily connect into what the town's doing. And as you know, the town's system's evolving as well, so it's but we will have that capability, and everybody's trained on them, and even a lot of us, I have one, and a lot of local neighborhood emergency preparedness teams also have those radios. So there is quite a broad community of people listening in on those channels already.
Randy, you have something to say?
Yeah, Kim Rivera, and please correct me if I'm wrong, if anything has changed. I asked a lot of questions and was sort of focused around this evacuation order, shelter in place piece. And it's my understanding that, and I think Don Bullard answered this in the spring, that the decision for the schools to shelter in place is likely under an evacuation order, but if there is an evacuation order, it does not necessarily mean the schools are at that point sheltering in place. There could be a period of 1 hour or some time frame for a controlled dismissal, and then a shelter in place, or the shelter in place order could come in simultaneous to the evacuation order.
The next slide.
And the evacuation order, I mean, the critical thing that was communicated to me is that it's mandatory. It's not technically enforced by law enforcement. I think that question was answered at the Wildfire Preparedness Fair. But people are not allowed back in. And also, the real critical thing that was answered for me is that once a shelter in place is declared, parents are not legally allowed to pick up their students. So that part is legally enforced, and this is, I think, the heart of
You're correct with
a big
pretty much
concern.
everything you said.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of having an evacuation order and having school shelter in place, and as parents evacuating under this terrible situation and having to leave our kids, I mean, this is what
The hard part.
keeps us up at night. And I think this is, and even a few parents trying to go pick up their kids, given our evacuation routes and the problems with that, could cause just massive problems, massive loss of life. So
It is, which is why this presentation was so important, so that parents understand when there is a moment in time and there is a shelter in place, that your students are well protected. because of the construction of these buildings, because of the defensible space, because of the additional resources that would be called to protect the structure where the kids are in during that time where firefighters would come and make their stand and protect that structure. So it's not like it's 100%, you know, to put any parent's mind at ease, but at least it's just to let you know that there is a reason behind, you know, having the construction where it's at and having these things in place. So if there is a shelter in place, that your students, like Roberta said, their safety is the number one priority, so they will be well protected. And sometimes, as much as us as parents, we want to go get our kid regardless because we just want our children with us, sometimes you're putting yourself more in harm's way along with your child and making that last minute just because it's the parental thing that you want to do. But that's why these measures are put in place to protect both you and your student. And it becomes a hard thing, but just reassuring you that everything is being done, these safety measures are put in place for a reason. And your student will be protected here until that event passes.
Before I take the question, I just want to say, this is our decision support tree that we developed in partnership with Woodside Fire Protection District. And as a school district and the Fire Protection District, again, this is available in the information that's on our website, and I'll send this presentation out as well. But there's a point, if there's a red flag warning issued and students are on campus, and if I had a pointer, I would point to that part right there, has an official evacuation order been issued, then we would either shelter in place or evacuate, depending on the circumstances and the guidance of Woodside Fire Protection District, and then follow shelter in place protocols or evacuation protocols. So there's so many, you know, circumstances that would inform how the decisions are made, but we don't make those decisions in isolation either. So thinking about all of the different scenarios and plans that we have in place to address those scenarios.
So twofold, so this school, you said the MUR or the gym is the main shelter in place. So are there food and water rations inside that gym
So
at all times for that
yeah,
situation?
so we have water, and we're placing an order for food, so I think we have to get
Enough water for all students on campus and adult students for how many days
for
and
3
how long?
days. That's the requirement.
Because when I was a kid, Redwood City School District, in the beginning of the year, we brought in a plastic shoebox with food rations for 3 days.
Yeah.
And it seems like, you know, something like, I don't know why we don't do that anymore, but
Well,
putting an N95, a
I tried that
flashlight.
last year, and the response was very poor. So that's why we didn't do it this year.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to help with that. I think it's kind of a no-brainer, and
Yeah.
especially in this.
So we take care of it as a
climate.
district, and we have water, and I think the water expires in 20 years, but we have enough for 3
And there's
days.
restrooms inside that
Yes.
gym?
Yeah.
And the other question was, you know.
Oh,
is-
sorry, can I
Yeah.
add to that? So restrooms, or they're called luggable-loos, which are the buckets with the toileting supplies. So every classroom in the district has one of those, as well as our shelter-in-place locations.
And then there's a lot of support tree information and stuff, but when does that get thrown out the window? Is there some autonomy within the schools and within the teachers and within the staff to say, you know, I'm putting 20 kids in my car right now and I'm getting out of here? Or, you know, if all system failure, what's the consensus on that?
So we haven't had that discussion with our staff yet, but that seems like something that we should talk about. And like I alluded to earlier, we have said, like for example, at Corte Madera, the neighborhood, you know, if the PV Ranch folks drive by and we just, you know, have kids going cars, and we were trying to organize something like that, a caravan, but it seemed to be worth the energy at that point, but something that's not organized, but it's just more.
Even 3 or 4 classroom parents, you know, instead of, you know, 15, 20, 30 classroom parents showing up to shuttle, you know, who are on an emergency list, who have a radio, you know, something like that. Seems more doable.
Well, we should think about, and in collaboration with the town and Woodside Fire, the option for when everything else fails.
And I think, I mean, this is a big concern, a big part of discussions we had about this. The shelter in place is that utter disaster emergency. There's not a worse scenario if everything fails and kids are piling into cars. The shelter in place is the alternative to that. So the schools have different policies and things. And again, if any of this has changed, we'll try to update that and we should correct that. But some schools, both Caroline, where our kids go to preschool, Windmill across the street, their evacuation plan, as far as I know right now, is to evacuate in staff cars. And PVSD and Priory's policy is to shelter in place. And now this has been developed over the last couple of years. It's obviously just a terrible situation to think about and to figure out. But you know, the scenario that you're describing is what the shelter in place policy is meant to avoid. Because the concern is that would lead to more loss of life, be a worse situation. People are trying to evacuate when there are this many kids in one location on our congested routes. It's my understanding that's why the bus plan basically failed, because it's too hard to get the buses in.
Yeah, it's surprising that that's even still a consideration.
And that's why the shelter in place is a big thing and why the construction is done, because you think, even though theoretically you'd be thinking, oh, it's quicker to just put kids in a car and just get them out, when really you're really not getting them out, because you're going to be dealing with roadblocks, closures, cars, traffic, and you're going to be sitting there and not being able to get out. And when the fire blows through, there's no protection on the car. At least these buildings and the way everything is separated and having protection in those structures, that shelter in place is a better chance withstanding than being in a car. So that's why the shelter in place is is the go-to when all else fails. No one ever wants to think of that scenario, but it is the best bet because it's better than, at least firefighters would be here and protecting that structure and providing that structure protection, and the fact that that's why these things are in place, because getting them in a car is sometimes not the best thing to be doing, even though you're just thinking, I just need to get out. That's why, again, as Roberta was saying, the preventative measure to all of this is when you already know, like the day of, or the red flag warning is put out, no school today, just avoiding it altogether. That is going to be the first line of that decision of saying, you know what, why do you take the risk of bringing kids to school? The lives are more important. So that's the first, that would be the first step in prevention altogether. But when it happens and it's already here, that's when the warning comes through, okay, we're closing the school, early dismissal, let's follow the dismissal protocol, let's get the kids out, because so that you don't get to the last ditched effort. Is that all those early steps is what would eliminate that problem from happening to begin with. That's theoretically what you hope for. But we're not God, we don't know what situations are gonna bring what circumstances, but these things are in place, and they're things that keep going over and over, figuring out the best way to keep the kids safe, keep them in or evacuate them. So
I also wanted to point out that we are in communication with the preschools in our area, with Windmill and Caroline, and also with Priory and the Department of Emergency Management and the town. So we can do a better job of coordinating and collaborating. I think this year we're committed to that. So, but we have had a lot of conversations and discussions about planning so we can learn from each other.
I think it's also good to point out that in many of these scenarios, we're in contact with the sheriff's department, and the sheriff's department would likely have somebody here on site. And so oftentimes if a parent or somebody freaks and they start grabbing kids and throwing them in a car, sheriff's not going to let them leave.
Yeah.
And likely you'll have traffic controls right there at Alpine and Portola anyway. So if they made it that far, the sheriff might tell them, turn around, go shelter in place.
They've said that in no uncertain terms.
No uncertain terms. They will control the traffic.
What if
you can imagine there's scenarios where the sheriff can't even get here, right? But I think that's one of those scenarios where we immediately go to the shelter in place.
Yeah. But if one question that's come up is if you're a parent volunteer and you're on campus and you would be evacuating, you're not staying with the kids that are sheltering in place, but your kid's here, can you take your kid? Can you take your close parent friends' kids? How is that authorization given? The question I was going to ask earlier is it seems like there's a lot of verification procedure in place during the reunification process, which is after everything is cleared. There, for regular dismissal pickup, it's really just a visual verification by the teacher of knowing the parent. What is the
So
what is the verification
that goes back to
for
Amita's
control?
question earlier, and that's something we need to really drill down and identify, because that could be just chaotic, and
Yeah, I
we need
think
to get that.
That policy is really important. I think learning
Yeah.
from the 2022 Corte Madera, and what policies were in place
Yeah.
for that.
Yeah.
I think also, and I appreciate all the work you guys have done, are doing, I know this is like agonizing for everybody involved. But having the parents know that once there's a shelter in place, they can't come, and dealing with that angst that they're gonna have, which I know is not gonna be fun for you, before an emergency, so that you're not dealing with it during an emergency, I think is important.
So that they know that information, even if they don't like it. and
Right.
They're not hearing it.
They're
for
not
the first
learning about it
time.
while they're driving down to CMS
Yeah.
and being told,
Yeah.
sorry, you can't do this.
Yeah.
Which is, my question kind of goes along with that. When are we relying, for like level 1 and 2, is that San Mateo County alerts, or is that also Portola Valley School District, or is that until like level 3, and then it's like the evacuation, that's, I'm assuming it's gonna be San Mateo County and Portola, so is there like a way to like, instead of sending it at level 3, sending it at level 1, so you have more time to get your child?
I'm not sure I understand your
I
exact
think
question.
those steps that you saw
Yeah.
there is specific to the school district,
Okay.
not to the county. Because if something was happening in South San Francisco, which is the northern part of the county, but nothing's gonna be happening here yet. It doesn't impact depending on, until it's,
Very local.
it would be a local, so those steps are for here only.
So when will we get the alert for, as a parent, to come pick up our child?
Immediately,
Okay.
as soon as we know. Time is of the essence.
But just to
I just think we all should keep in mind, it's hard to talk about this in a really kind of universal sense. Everything depends on what the specific situation is. A lot of the conversation about sheltering in place has to do with an earthquake, a fire. It's not going to be the protocol necessarily if there's an active shooter situation. It might be, but
Well,
it's
that's
not.
lockdown.
Yeah, or it's trying to get kids off campus, if it's safe. So I just want to point out how specific everything is to the circumstance that's presented. I also just wanted to quickly share, I have 2 kids at Woodside High School. There was an active shooter, suspected, and it was very hard to hear that you couldn't go get your kid. Very hard, especially for the first half hour where we didn't quite know if it was real or not. Sorry. But I will say the communication through San Mateo County, through the school district was excellent. And if people understand, they need to be signed up for San Mateo County alerts.
Okay, so there you go.
Yeah.
Good segue. Thank you.
Because, I just want to really kudos to everyone involved in that because
Yeah.
the communication was really, really good. And they made it very clear, you cannot come to campus.
Yeah, so communication is critical. So these are just, actually, all of those are clickable
Can
links.
you go back
Yeah.
one
Oh,
slide
sorry,
again?
yeah, go back.
Because I wanted to talk about too. Yes, there
Yeah,
are
go
clickable links. SMC alert you see is there, but these are other great resources of communication of knowing not just what's going on here, but through the county altogether. Pulse Point is another great app. That's an app that tells you about everything that the fire department is going to in the county. You can put, and it's actually throughout, you can put what county you want to know what's going on. So let's say you have grandparents or your parents live in another county and you want to hear what kind of medical calls or fires or what's going on there. Pulse Point is great to see where we're going. It doesn't give you like all the details because there's HIPAA laws involved, but it gives you at least the basics of, hey, there's a fire, there's an active fire, structure fire going on here at this location. So Pulse Point is a great resource to check into. And you can set alerts. You can put like, you just want Portola, if you're doing Portola Valley and you want specific alerts when it's a structure fire or if it's a car accident or if it's a vegetation, you can set your specifics to that. WPV Ready, great resource. There's a ton of information because aside from everything that we've been talking about today with evacuations and stuff in the school, It's also a way for you to get your house prepared, how to get your family prepared, your pets, your animals, everything. There's a lot of great resources there, how to become a fire-wise community. There's a lot of good information, defensible space, any questions you have, there's a lot of links, there's a lot of information, so that's a great, about being ready for everything that we're talking about. That's another great resource. Of course, Woodside Fire, we're in the middle of a new website that's still under construction. It's almost ready to be released, which will have a lot of good updated information. The local radio is your other means of communication when stuff's going on with information being updated. So that's good to, to know that you have access to that station, because that's another form of it's not two-way communication, but at least you'll know what's going on. It'll give you that information. And then Town of Portola Valley always has their information, and of course OES. So these are all great resources to plug into. Yes.
I'm wondering if you all could send out at some point a recommendation for a relatively inexpensive emergency radio that people could have. I mean, I don't have a radio at home.
That's a good one. Do you
I'll
have
look
into
into
that? No, not off the top of my head, but
Ray,
that's a good.
Ray
one.
has done that, and if you just send
I
an
was
email to
gonna
Ray
say copies
Rothrock,
of-
he'll get you what you need.
Maybe all parents would, I mean, they don't have to buy it,
Yeah.
but if it's something that they could do.
And he has training too.
And then also, if you go to the next slide, I wanted to point out that everyone should have SMC alert. I'm assuming that you all do and hoping that you all do, and if you don't, please have that app or sign up for it rather.
And Zone Haven.
And Zone Haven. So Zone Haven, this is an excellent resource, and it's important to know your zone. So Ormondale is Zone 2, CMS is Zone 8, and there's the map, but that has critical information that everyone should have. In fact, we recommend this for all of our staff as well, to have Zone Haven and SMC alert.
Zone Haven and SMC is recommended for anyone in the county. So it's not just for the school, but it's for everybody. So it's good to be aware and know what your zone is. Yes, Randy.
After the Maui fire, I looked into some radios and was thinking even harder about what if the power's out, what if the cell's out issue. And really the AM radio is critical for our town. So I think in terms of communication, staying updated, everybody should make sure they're on SMC alert. And they just did a test, I think on the 10th.
Yeah.
So if you don't see that, then you need to take action to get signed up. I think I think it's important to do multiple tests, and that's kind of under discussion. But it's good to get a battery backup AM radio that plugs in, so if the power goes out, you have the battery backup, have it already set to 1680. But the thing that I'm not sure of is if the infrastructure is set up to make sure that the school evacuation status is repeatedly announced on the AM radio, because it would be really important to know for all parents and under an urgent evacuation situation, if the schools are doing a controlled dismissal or a shelter in place. And so I think we need to, again, work together with the districts in the town and make sure that that's being blasted out, especially if comms are out or power's out.
Right.
Yeah, and maybe if you say, like with the shelter-in-place protocol, because if my understanding, you're not allowed to come pick up your kid. Like if it's like linked, like shelter-in-place, kids will not be released, do not come, or whatever the thing to say.
Really explicit.
Yeah, because I hear shelter-in-place, I'm like, okay, good, they've got my kids safe, I will go get them. And apparently that's not the thing to do, so making that more clear. And once you're in shelter-in-place, doors are locked, you cannot come, so get your kid before that happens. Kind of making that very clear.
Even that it's a different, even legal status than the evacuation order, which is considered mandatory, but not technically legally enforceable. It's my understanding that the shelter-in-place is legally enforceable. You stop by law enforcement. You're endangering yourself and other parents and other kids if you're trying to go against that.
Yeah, so just making that clear to the parents.
Red flag alert, 20 miles per hour wind and 25% or less of humidity. Like, is that the standard?
Actually, I don't know the answer to that. I'd have to look it up.
I love that question.
Yeah, that's a good
Because,
question.
I mean,
triggers
if-
it? Yeah.
I have on my phone, when the wildfires were a couple of years ago, I have a whole page dedicated to just the thumbnails of all the alerts. And I think maybe it could even be volunteer led, where we do a PowerPoint presentation, parents can come, we can show you how to do the thumbnails, where you literally click Zone Haven and it zooms in on the school. So you don't have to go through, type in the address of the school, do all that. Purple air, all of the SNC alert stuff, so that you could flip to that one emergency page and you have all your home links for just those specific places. Is really helpful. And also, you can actually put in those sorts of things like on weather.com to have a thumbnail where you click it and it shows, what is the wind at the school right now, what is the humidity. So as a parent, you can pull your kid out of school if you just feel like there may be a higher amount of danger.
Exactly. Yeah, of course.
Thank you. So we have many internal and external modes of communication. Won't read all of this. Some of them are in the works, and others are ones we've already talked about. So we'll go on to the next slide. And here is our link to our the safety information we have, emergency preparedness information we have for parents on our website. And this is a living, breathing document that if you print it out, it may change, but it's good to have it if you print it. Has information about our communications, what we do to prepare for emergencies, local resources, has a lot of great information there, and then wildfire preparedness and emergency evacuation. And that part of this plan has room for improvement. So it has some of the resources we've talked about today, but I need to add some of those as well. So I will do that.
And that QR code, when you scan it and it brings you to their landing or their platform, it has like the level 1, 2, 3, 4, that chart information. So it's got a lot of the charts and decision tree and all that information in there so that so that you can read through it at your leisure and understand it. It also talks about the shelter in place information, but I think it's a good tagline, to add with the shelter in place so that parents don't get that confused. That was good feedback for that, so thank you.
Great. The last part of this presentation I just threw in yesterday about poor air quality. We won't go through it, but it's relevant to today and what we are living. So just more information, but you see that we send out information and we have plans in place for, especially on the next slide, for activities when there are different levels of air quality concerns. So with that, are there any questions or any other feedback you have for us?
I just was gonna make a comment too. Sorry, what was your name?
Michelle.
Michelle. So I love the idea of what you brought up for, getting together with parents. I'm sure I don't know if there's like a women's club or a mother's club and a father's club and whatever, but that's, PTO, whatever kind of meeting. Because sometimes I know it's hard to get a lot of different parents together, whether it's a workshop or a presentation or whatever, but at those meetings, it could be a great topic of being, hey, let's get together, we're gonna all, put these, let me help you put these thumbnails, you can lead something like that, but, the school can only do so much on their part. The parents have a responsibility too, to become informed, do the research, understand what's in place, put these things on your phone, these thumbnails, so you have quick resources, quick links. The school is trying to give you guidance and show you what they have in place, but, as parents, we also have that responsibility to not expect that they're gonna do all the work. We have our own work that we need to do as parents as well. So, getting together as big groups, hey, let's set our next parent PTO meeting or whatever, let's make this an important topic that we talk about, or especially because there weren't a lot of parents here, all of you, at the next one saying, hey, the school did this presentation, this is what we learned, these were the takeaways, share it with other parents, get that word spread around. Educate them on shelter in place and what that means. The school will do their part, but your words are super heavy amongst all of you parents that all talk to each other, network with each other, so spreading that information and word is also very valuable and helps support the school as well. Thank you.
I really appreciate you being here. Let's give it up.
Thank
you for inviting us today. Thank you. And thank you all for taking time to be here today. And please spread the word. And let us know if you have any questions or other feedback. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good meeting you.